now. So I just have the audio too. And Mr. Filey is a new friend of mine. We also just connected, so I really appreciate being invited to have this conversation. And I have been following, I'm lifelong right here in Metro Richmond, back and forth from Richmond to Chesterfield. And I definitely connect to your personal story of being biracial and having different parts of the family throughout different parts of the city. And so watching the transformation in Richmond is very personal to me, and the good parts that we can celebrate as well as some of the challenges that we're having. And being here for so long and watching the change happen, it's really inspired me to become more involved in the city politics and community, really. And politics is just part of that community work. And a big part of my own barriers I've found has just been being a woman in this space sometimes can create that barrier, even if it's unspoken. So after the Arthur Ashe celebration and the event, I actually did not go to the entire event. I had my daughter with me and I knew it would be so much going on.
You missed the great event.
So I missed the great event, but I did go to the community event afterwards. But throughout the entire ceremony, my phone was blowing up because I am such a big proponent of women being celebrated. And there was just so much concern about you not being officially named on the program and not having a seat on the stage. And it was something that just hurt a lot of our hearts. As excited and as amazing as this whole process was, it was a bit discouraging for myself as a Richmonder, as a woman, as a Black woman. So I really appreciate the time of being able to sit with you and you kind of take us through the process.
You choked up. I'm sorry.
Right. It's a huge piece. And also just watching dynamics and relationships in Richmond, it's important to know how that affects us career-wise, affects our passion, and how we unite and really move forward. So I would love to maybe just kind of start from the beginning. And as
I didn't mean to get all
it's okay.
I appreciate this. And I did. One of the first things I heard was your tweets. You know, people were screenshotting and sending them to me. So I appreciated that somebody recognized that there was a voice, even if it wasn't mine, but there were no women, period, that were able to be a part of that program. And I think that we missed a lot.
I do too. And for a lot of the young girls that want to grow up and be a part of this, for the idea of equality that Arthur Ashe was really fighting for, that includes Black women as well. And you know, that day it was really hard to put that on social media because it was such a celebratory moment. But, and that's what I get a lot of pushback for, sometimes with bringing up something that we're all thinking, something that we all see, well maybe not all of us, but I talked about it with my friends and I said somebody needs to say something about this. And it was really comforting that as soon as we put it out there and we said it, so many people were in support of that, right? They were like, you're right, I was thinking the same thing.
A lot of people were thinking that.
They were thinking it. I mean, your name, I was watching the live feed, I'm so glad they did put it on Facebook. Your name was brought up over and over. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim Gray. Thank you, Kim Gray. But it would be really great for the woman to have her own voice as well.
I really just wanted an opportunity to say thank you to all the people who put themselves out there and really made sacrifice to see it through all the way. There were people that were with me from day one. There were people who came along reluctantly because they started to listen to the message of the importance and the significance of what it means to our city to have something named after a person of prominence from our city who happens to be a person of color. He is our most famous Richmonder, and yeah, he's got a statue and he's got, but you know, how many things do we have named after other Richmonders that aren't as significant as Arthur Ashe is to us. So I think it was really important to acknowledge all the people who made sacrifice and showed up and didn't falter when people were in their faces. I mean, we got threats.
Right. And is there anybody that you'd like to name specifically or thank, or just put that out there since you weren't able to?
Well, there are organizations, specifically the Richmond Tennis Association, which is primarily a white organization, but they love Arthur Ashe and have been true to him from the beginning. The Kappas, who are his fraternity brothers, showed up, they organized, they made sure that they were present. There were many black tennis organizations from the city that work with our youth. And I just wanted to be able to say thank you because there were lots of tears shed during the hearings. And there's one man in particular, Mr. Jenkins, who played Arthur Ashe, and he's in his 90s now. And he played Arthur Ashe when Arthur Ashe was a teen, and he was like in his 20s. And he's the last black man to have beaten Arthur Ashe on the court. And he downplayed it and said it was because he was, he was in his prime, and Arthur Ashe was just starting out. But he respected him for years, and they remained friends. And he got out of his wheelchair, walked up to the podium, and spoke in support of the Boulevard name change. So there were so many people, the presidents of the associations along the Boulevard that I wanted to acknowledge.
Great. And you mentioned a little bit about threats and just the process of getting the name change. Could you share a little bit about how that was? And
well, the scariest point was after the community meeting we had at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, because there were people who were physically aggressive towards me and yelling and very close in my face with their hands and fingers. There were people who were quiet that were a little more frightening because they were really quiet and waited around for everybody else to leave and then confronted me, as I was walking to my car. And after the vote and everything passed and security had left council chambers, there were also people who remained kind of like waiting in the wings to confront me. So there were some scary moments, and then we got ugly voice messages. Cynthia Newbell was told by one of her constituents that they would spit on her when they saw her. Cynthia Newbell and Chris Hilbert were the two votes that I had going in from the beginning. And so there were only 3 votes, with mine included, at the onset of this discussion. So
who were the other? There's the 3 for you, Chris and Cynthia going.
That was it. Okay. Cynthia Newbell and Chris Hilbert were the only ones who told me from the time of introduction until we passed it that they were going to vote in favor of it. And
is it true, or what do you know a little bit about Arthur Ashe's nephew? Had approached our current Mayor Stoney about this name change before, and it's written that the mayor basically pushed it over to the council, said, hey, figure this out with council, and that wasn't something that he was willing to take on from his office. Right.
I mean, that's what he's told news reporters. Obviously, I wasn't
part of that.
I know that the nephew approached another council member first and then approached me about it.
Okay. So what was your first introduction to the name change?
So David Harris came to me and asked if I was willing to support it, and I said yes. And not everybody thought that was the best idea. I had friends who were saying this is, coming from your district and where you said you could lose a lot of political capital and credibility, and
with that you mean from your district, meaning that it is a majority white district,
right? And being the first person of color to ever represent a majority white district, it is. I'm very practical about what can be done and what can't. So I pulled a lot of them along with me and had those kitchen table conversations. And I think people miss a lot of that. And my brother is pretty radical and doesn't quite always understand my position on things. But I like to get things done and not so much make a big, loud statement of what should be. I'm always working behind the scenes to move the needle forward. And I think I get accused of not going hard enough at times. But, you know, I've learned how to listen to people from very different backgrounds and try to find common ground and move forward on the common ground and then build from there. I call it my big toe. If I can get my toe in the door, you know, you're not going to shut it. We'll eventually get the door open and have some really meaningful things happen.
So do you think that those kitchen table conversations, do you think that this is something that worked for you in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I spent 8 years on the school board, not without controversy, but everybody at the end of the day, with respect to their children, wanted the same thing. They wanted a good, solid education. They want their child to feel welcomed and loved and accepted in their school environment and really to reach their maximum potential. I don't care if they were from Gilpin Court or Monument Avenue. So it's a lot easier when we're talking about children than when we're talking about other issues. Because as a mom, and you know, we can always find common ground with our children and what their needs are and making sure that every child's needs are met. So I use that approach with my city council service.
Do you think that this decision to move forward with Arthur Ashe would be something that is held against you by your district?
I think some people, but I think at the end, I kind of had my vision and what happened that day when the signs were unveiled, people got it. Yeah. Like really the people who needed to be there were there. Right. I got so many notes and messages and calls, and people really saw there's a sea of people from every religious background, from every age group, from every race, and it's peaceful. I mean, there were thousands of people there, not one argument, not one disagreement even. Right. Everybody was of the same accord and peaceful. And it was a very emotional and moving experience for me. Right.
And hearing that and hearing the diversity of the crowd especially gets me excited, but it also is just a big reason why I know that we really missed a big opportunity that day to show not just the city and the Commonwealth of what leadership looks like here and who are some of the game changers, whether they play it this way loud in front or behind the scenes at the kitchen table. And that for me is really what I just am still heartbroken about is this what we're going to settle on? And I just know that there's so many of us that aren't ready to. Right. And so that day you said it was an emotional one for you.
Yeah, and when I got there I opened the program. Saw the names and I was really surprised.
Okay, so you didn't know the names before then?
No, the program wasn't shared with me. Someone had called and given me like a secret message that there was a breakfast reception, but I wasn't on the list, and that I should show up, but because they didn't expect that they would turn me away if I showed up, but I made the decision not to just show up and barge my way in. So I got there and I'd already resolved that, hey, I'm going to have a good time. This is a really remarkable event. I'm going to be in the crowd with the people, and that's where my comfort level is, you know, and it was very, the energy in that crowd was very moving and fulfilling. So at one point, because I stood up the majority of the program, someone saw me and told me to come sit down. I was like, no, I'm fine. this was an older gentleman who was pretty forceful, and I ended up sitting next to Kassir Khan, who I invited to come. And so at this point, it was when John Lewis was speaking, and I was really emotional, and tears were rolling down my face, and he just kind of patted my shoulder, and that was just a really, like, a moment that I'll never forget, that will stay with me and shape who I am for all my days.
That is really special. So it sounds like you had such a huge role in the beginning, and being the council person that accepted this mission, really, because it has failed twice prior to this, right? And those were 93?
I think it was 93 when the monument was going up, and then again in 2001.
Okay.
Sorry.
2001. So knowing that this would be a challenge, you took that challenge. So you were the person that came in, was working with the family, working with not just your district, but the associations around there. What else kind of coalition building did you have to do to really get this done?
Well, I was working on my colleagues and trying to bring them along, and there are two others who represent Monument Avenue who were not having it. But by the time that day rolled around, I was in a very emotional the voting day rolled around. I was in a heightened state. Pretty much lost my voice screaming at people. And the good news was the big pushback was process. So, and that tends to be what people want to talk about, is process and being heard. So we put it off in order to allow for enough public input, that if it had been done by resolution, it would have required 90 days. I had an ordinance which didn't have a timeline, but we said we'll allow for the 90 days. And I just out of the air said, well, let's just pick February. It's Black History Month. Why not? So when February rolled around, I still didn't have the votes that morning. But I got a call, and I was very emotional because I had just gotten a call that a dog had been set on fire in the park across the street from where I lived. I wasn't sure if it was related, because crazily we were getting threats, and someone had left some information about white supremacy in my door, and so I was very, very crazy emotional. I was crying, and Kristen Larson called me from the 4th District and said, Kim, I'm going to support it. I hadn't bullied her. It was like I hadn't even cursed you out yet. I was just getting ready to. And we joke about it. As I said, I hadn't even threatened or bullied you. And you called and said you were going to support it. And she said, you know what? After listening to the racist opposition, she was like, I couldn't put myself with them. Because her whole thing was respecting the other two council members who represent the Boulevard, because we have an unspoken kind of thing. You're not going to go into, I'm not going into Ellen's district or Kristen's district regulating what's going to happen there, because she knows best from her constituents what they want. So she said, I can't go against, two other council people for one council person who represents the Boulevard. And by then I had already gotten Craig to pull like the data on how much of the Boulevard I actually represent versus them. And, like, I'm the one that's going to take the heat for it. And we were still getting letters of opposition, but Kristen called, and I was like, oh, so I'm crying. And then I got into a shouting match with my two Boulevard colleagues, Arthur Ashe Boulevard colleagues. And I just, the whole dog and trying to get help for my neighbors. My neighbor's son had been murdered, and I'd been asking for cameras in the park and more security because of all the robberies and stuff that had been going on in the neighborhood, and it didn't seem like I was getting a response. But when this dog incident happened, everybody woke up, and it was important then. So I was like, 400 years. I remember screaming on the phone, how much longer? And they were like, are you okay? Are you okay? I was like, no, I'm not okay, and I'm not going to be okay. So once we got to the meeting that night, I think the whole room transformed, and people knew what they had to do. And this was also on the tails of Northam's blackface, and then Herring's blackface, or not, but I don't know.
And he's admitted blackface, but we didn't see the blackface. Right?
Curtis Blow. So I think people were afraid of being identified as racist, so they voted like they did.
And you said you picked February because of Black History Month, and
yeah.
And 2019, the 400th year, as well as we couldn't have predicted what would happen in February, but it certainly did add to the context.
But actually, the 400-year thing was part of my overall plan. It was 2018, and it was the 50th anniversary of was it his Grand Slam or his U.S. Open?
This is Wimbledon.
Wimbledon,
yeah.
63. So, or 68, yeah. It was 68, Wimbledon. Okay. And then I was like, okay, so this is 50 years, but we're not going to be able to get this done in 2018. And that's when I met with the museum directors, and they said they would get on board with ironically, or not so ironically, one of the museums wouldn't meet with me, and that was the Daughters of the Confederacy.
Okay. Okay.
So we tried to get a meeting, and they weren't interested.
Okay.
But the VMFA and the Virginia Museum of History and Culture both agreed to meet, and both personally supported the name change.
Great. And that was in 2018.
That was
before.
in 18.
Okay.
That was before my community meeting in October.
Okay.
So the VMFA offered up their theater for a community meeting, and then it was in 2018 that Jamie said, you can do a big lawn party, and that's how I tacked on to the 400 years.
Great, great, great. So you have these relationships in the community to reach out and say, I've got this plan, whether people think it's going to come true or not, and people are bought into what you're trying to do.
People are bought into it, and maybe they did. Maybe he didn't think he was going to have to actually have a lawn party. But I think it actually augmented his exhibits. And the woman who spoke to me at the gym this morning said she told the director, Jamie Boskett, that she had never entered the museum because of what it stood for. And it was Arthur Ashe Boulevard Day that she went in, and she got to see the new exhibits about the 400 years of the first Africans, not just to Virginia, but to the Americas.
Right.
So she said it was really welcoming and inviting, and that she commended him for doing it.
That's great. That's great. So you have you put in the work last year, 2018, and built the coalition and received the threats, and again, just put your entire emotion person into this, and it passed. Something that we were finally something we were all really excited about. So was there a moment where you possibly felt like the spirit of the name change maybe got away from you, from your control or your leadership?
Well, I think that if you try to hold on to things like that, it's never as meaningful as. I was just glad it got done,
right?
Honestly,
right.
And I'm secondary to that. You know what I'm saying? So,
and we as women, I feel like we take that role many times. We're just going to get it done, take the step back, but that's what feeds our satisfaction, is getting it done.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fulfilled that day. I didn't have to be on the stage. I did want to acknowledge those people, and I have been personally writing notes and acknowledging folks and taking them the little headbands and listening. Everybody laughed and thought that was corny, but they did it.
Oh no,
I love the
it.
Headbands.
No, I actually reached out to some of the organizers and said I need some extra ones because people weren't able. They love them, right?
It's like,
And that's going to be like I can't wait to have my daughter, get a little older and see this, right? And know that.
I just thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's part of, what will be in the exhibition in 50 years.
Yeah,
right?
And I think the good news is that we had news coverage. People were in the room.
Mm-hmm.
People knew, and I'm grateful that the mayor did co-sponsor it. He did the day that we were voting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He was invited out to the community meetings. He didn't attend. He was at the last minute,
Mm-hmm.
said he wasn't coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited that people got on board when they did.
Mm-hmm.
I just know the good news is that it was well documented how everything went down.
Right.
So history is a fable agreed upon anyway.
Right.
We know in our hearts how change happens and how things move forward. I was really proud as a Richmonder to be a small part of that day and how everything came together. It was beautiful.
So as far as the ceremony and planning that, what was your vision and what did you were able to give to that?
So the only thing I didn't plan was the two venues. I had planned for everything to move to the VMFA lawn.
Okay.
Because I didn't want people to have to move their cars and and they were wide open. I wanted lots more music. The Union Band and the Virginia State bands were ready to come. I had a close friend of mine who wanted to do the benediction, and then I had some kids who are very talented that I wanted to take from old Negro spirituals all the way to hip hop. From through Motown and all the movements, and then to modern day music, like the whole 400 years of music.
Right.
And they were all set to go, but there are other events, I'm sure, but we can
no, these are great ideas. And they sound so. It sounds like you were still doing organizing and really trying to plan that. At what moment did you realize that it wasn't yours to necessarily finalize anymore?
I got pushback from the chief administrative officer, and I think she wanted to take control of the program. And then I was calling Jamie at the museum. They were saying he was in charge of the program, and he was saying the CAO was in charge of the program. So I never really got a clear answer on who was putting the program together after.
Gotcha. Because as a Richmonder, I will say that, I, again, really surprised you weren't on there, that not one woman was on there. How much spotlight our current mayor received in that moment, knowing that he came in the last minute.
Didn't have a whole lot to do with
it. But then even seeing Dominion as a sponsor and Tom Farrell being a speaker.
He was the opening speaker.
And being so aligned with the community, I understand that Dominion is getting a lot of pushback right now with their pipelines and going into historically black communities and building those. And is that part, are they really listening or care about these communities? This is something that a lot of folks are asking state legislators. So for this to be a moment for Black history,
right,
and Dominion to come in and to be the sponsor, to be the opening voice, it was confusing for us.
I was thrown by that.
Okay.
I have to admit.
So that wasn't part of yours either.
No, I did get a call from Dominion the day before they announced that they were going to be a big sponsor. They had already spoken with David Harris, the nephew. That kind of got away as well, because there was a tennis group that was being sponsored, and it was going to be an event at River City Roll to raise money for their tennis group. I don't really know what happened with or where the sponsorships. I know there was a lot of cool Trotsky that got made, but I wasn't heavily involved in sponsorships. I referred them to members of the Scotts Addition Boulevard Association, and they were working in tandem with David Harris, the nephew.
Gotcha. Yeah. And it really is one of those Richmond experiences where I feel like we're going in the right direction, and then at some point there really is just...
That was odd. And then David Harris had announced it a couple of days earlier at the Scott's Edition meeting. And so when I got the call from Dominion that they were about to announce it, I said, yeah, I heard that at the Scott's Edition. So I think they were a little surprised that that had already been put out there. But I said, it's no longer, my event. And I'm not able to get any information out of the group.
Moving forward and looking at Richmond and really hearing the concerns, even the threats that you received through this, I remember Tim Kaine said that this was a point of healing for Richmond. What other points of healing do you think that we could use here in the city? And what would that look like?
Well, I think in light of all the killings we've had, I mean, that's tearing at my core right now. It touches me personally. I know a lot of these young people. 8 years on the school board, I spent a lot of time with these kids, and now they've gone on and they're getting in deeper trouble, and they're either being killed or they're the ones doing the shootings and killings. So it's very personal to me. I know the families, I know the stories, and I know that there is a way to break these cycles. And I don't think that we're moving in a direction where we're doing that. And it starts with the schools. And it starts when they're a lot younger, and when we have broken families that need help, we have to put the resources in, because I don't want to open my phone or the newspaper and see another innocent life lost, and I've seen too many.
And it's been a lot of young people.
Yes.
It really has, and that's heartbreaking, because especially serving the school board for so long, one of the questions I really wanted to talk about is what is the youth's role in taking our city forward? And it really is just making sure that they survive and reach to a certain point as well.
Yeah, thrive. Not just survive, but thrive. And they need support to do that. The ones who aren't being killed, some of them are killing themselves. And I've had several suicides that very young, very, very young children, 9, 10, and 11 years old. It's devastating to the entire family unit, the community. We've got to do more, and we've got to do a better job of reaching these young people. So one of the things that really has been working and is amazing is Carver has been neglected, and I have been quietly behind the scenes. I knew there was a cheating scandal going on. Took it to the superintendent, took it to the folks who I thought could do something. They couldn't prove it because testing wasn't happening, but kids were denied their rightful education. And now those are the young people who are illiterate, hopeless, looking for an out, and they turn on their communities. So I've got lots of great partnerships between the West Grace Association, the Monument Avenue Associations. They have raised $50,000. They put new curtains up in time for the graduation. We made sure the kids had clothing. We did a big coat drive last year. These are the kinds of things that help build those bridges, because if you're standing cold on a corner for weeks and years on end, you start to realize that everybody else isn't standing cold on the corner, it builds up a resentment and an anger that you can't it basically tells that child nobody cares about you.
And I think that that's what the larger Black Richmond community is really asking for, and saying, hey, do you all care about us? Do you see us right now? And What are you hearing from Black Richmonders of what they would want to see and what kind of issues are really pressing to them?
I think opportunities within the city. Code enforcement has been coming down on communities of color in Highland Park, Churchill, and the few remaining neighbors I have left in Jackson Ward and Carver. We need help. I have a lot of lower or fixed income neighbors who can't afford to do the repairs, and it's very intimidating to have the city come after you when we have developers own big swaths of real estate, very valuable real estate, and they allow it to be run down, you know, along Broad Street and other major corridors, and they don't get the attention that, you know, some of the lower income and older African Americans are getting. And you know, I'm getting text messages because I've been in my home a while, so people think, oh, I can lowball them and get them to move. So they'll call complaints in on the properties, and then they'll start sending postcards or text messages. I don't even know how they got my phone number, but I've got people texting and calling wanting to
buy your place.
Yeah. And that's happening across the city. So I think people need help with getting their home repairs done, feeling like they're not being treated like trash by city employees who come out to enforce code. You know, they need compassion. There is no affordability left. I think for tax purposes, we need to have, for primary homes, we need to have a way to freeze the amount of taxes a person pays, because if that continues to go up, it increases the mortgage and makes the person in jeopardy of losing their homes too. So I'm big on retention, and I'm also big on trying to find solutions for our public housing.
Public housing is a big conversation. Affordable housing is a big conversation. You touched a little bit for homeowners. What about renters? What are some things that...
I mean, we are continually doing things the way we happen, and we're going to get the same results. Someone said they were able to pull an archive of the discussions around 6th Street Marketplace and how they used HUD money, affordable housing money, to finance the 6th Street Marketplace, and it was all under the guise of, hey, this is going to bring in jobs and opportunities. And so they linked it up to affordable housing, and not unlike certain big deals you hear today, but the developers get paid, the banks get paid, and we're all left footing the bill. We're still paying for a lot of these things, but the people who we were sold that we're going to get the benefits aren't getting them. So,
and you mentioned big projects that we're talking about. I know one big project is the Coliseum project, the arena project, and I know I've been somebody that's brought up as soon as this was. I can't remember exactly my first exposure to it, but I've seen the plan, the PowerPoint presentation about 12 times now. And the benefit agreements, the benefits that the community can see, feel, and expect is something that I was continuing to ask about. And that is a lot of what we did, is look back at archives and the conversation about how we'll be protected, it'll bring jobs and housing. And it is a lot of the same narrative for that now. Any comments about the idea about the arena or the Coliseum coming up?
Well, it's obviously not been presented to council. The people who are bringing the proposal signed an embargo agreement with the mayor and the CAO that they weren't going to share the plan with us. So I've only seen the PowerPoint that you've seen. It's a $1.4 billion deal is what I'm told. So for a deal of that scale, not to have the actual proposal to look at. I mean, I'm sure there's something in it that is usable and positive, I would hope, but without seeing the proposal, I can't speak to the positives or negatives.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you proposed as well the commission
to review it
as well.
Yes. And we just put forward 2 names to serve as chair and vice chair, and they will submit 7 additional names to serve on that commission.
And very quickly, what is the commission built to do?
They have 90 days to review this proposal. So what we were asking for is people who have expertise in affordable housing, finance, and bond deals, and arenas, and that the scope of this project. So without having the project, it's a little hard to figure out who you need.
Exactly.
But the 2 names that were put forward are people with extensive experience in both of those areas that don't have any deal. We ask everybody to sign saying they don't have any involvement in this particular deal or any conflicts. So hopefully we can move forward and get some good answers and ideas out of the commission.
I want to say, I want to ask for a half an hour and I got an hour.
Oh, okay. Oh, it is 4, yeah.
I'm good.
But I would like to ask just one question. What do we need to do in the community to get the community engaged about what's going on with the state? What do we need to do?
I think much of what you've been doing, but just meeting people where they are. I've found, I know this is, but in working in the community, having a meal, a congregate meal, is what brings people together better than anything else. And I don't care what background you're from, or socioeconomic, or race, or anything. A meal and sitting around a table and having discussions is how you get to the meat of it. Could be a vegetarian meal, but you know, making sure that we bring people together in a positive and environment where they feel like they can be heard. And people don't always expect everything they ask for to get done, but they want to be heard, and they want to be respected, and respect begets respect. So.
And I know, having this conversation, some comrades and I held a community meeting and actually went through the economic development plan of what we knew, as well as gave some history of Navy Hill. So I think that was one piece that many people don't quite know about, that I felt like the community could connect to, right? Because a lot of folks may not feel totally comfortable coming to this meeting ready to give their ideas because they're not sure what we're asking for, right? So hearing the question of how can people get involved, what would you say for that person that is sitting at home, that's thinking about coming to one of these meetings but doesn't feel like their voice would be valued or they have an expertise in any of this?
I think it's neighbor to neighbor, it's person to person. A lot of, you know, what it has made me even hopeful within Carver Elementary School is the parents that were getting the police called on them because they were having altercations with the office staff are now PTA vice president or the, you know, they have been welcomed and invited, and they want their you know, the school administration wants their involvement. So I think you have to be genuine in it. It's not just about checking a box, but it's about connecting with real people in real time, and it's not something that you can just fabricate.
Right.
So you have to put yourself in the community and stay committed to going back. And I know with my experience, you get a lot of doors slammed in your face, and you get people saying you're phony, but if you keep going back and you keep meeting people where they are, eventually you'll make your connections and break. Not everybody's going to be welcoming and believing in any positive stuff, but those aren't the ones that necessarily need to be in the room. Right. So if you can get the majority of the people in the room and really having meaningful conversations, I think you've had a great win.
Great. One last question.
Sure.
Are you running for mayor in 2020?
I don't know.
Okay.
And I say that because right now I'm running for city council, and it's really my focus and goal is to represent my district. I've been asked a lot about running for mayor. I've been told by many different sources that perhaps our mayor is going off to run for higher office. I don't know that to be true. So there are so many things that come into play. I love my city and I want to see it grow and move forward and prosper. But I haven't reached a point where I'm saying, yeah, I'm out there running. Because it takes a lot of resources and time and energy, and you know, there may be someone else who is thinking about jumping in there too. So I think we need to.
Well, they didn't do the Arthur Ashe Boulevard.
We look forward to seeing what comes of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if I can get a picture of the two of you ladies, that would be great.